I have a dirty little secret. I have been a fraud. And I know what you're thinking. Then what in the world am I doing up here? Trust me, I've asked myself that same question. And in my head, I've already sprinted from the stage and bolted from the building. But there's something else you should know. I think you may be a fraud too. Statistically speaking, more than 70% of you are frauds, just like me. Imagine a friend was selected to deliver a TEDx talk and is super excited to share the news. Hey, guess what? TEDx Wabash accepted my talk. And you respond, are you sure? I mean, that has to be a mistake. No, really, they picked me. You have ideas worth sharing. Okay, well, maybe they just didn't have any applicants this year? Ridiculous, right? You'd never talk to a friend that way. And yet, our internal dialogue can be brutal. That was the actual conversation in my own head with my worst best friend, my inner critic. I like to call him the chairman of the shitty committee. I've spent my career learning how the brain works and how to make it work better. And I've stood on many stages like this one, sharing research about factors that either enhance or impede brain function, like how we get serotonin from the sun, endorphins from exercise, and oxytocin from laughter and hugs. And how sleep isn't just a time to rest the body. It's when our neural housekeepers come through and clean up all the neurotoxins and brain cells we've killed with stress throughout the day. And how all of that just makes the brain work better. And I often received amazing feedback. And yet, somehow, I could always explain it away as anything other than earned. Even when I knew I crushed it, I'd have this overwhelming anxiety that I just got lucky. That I wasn't good enough, smart enough, whatever enough to actually own it. It was only a matter of time before someone figured it out. Several years ago, I attended a conference and I reconnected with a few colleagues, all rock stars in their fields. And while catching up over wine and cheese about who's doing what, I felt really uncomfortable. It was as if I was watching their sizzle reels project next to my blooper reel on a split screen in my head. Sharing my work felt awkward, like trying to pass off a finger painting as a Picasso. Now, this is not something that was easy to do, but in a rare moment of courage, I just put it out there. Do you ever feel like a fraud? Like you have no business doing what you're doing? And then I braced myself, searching the room for the nearest exit. But I found myself surrounded by bobbleheads. They all knew exactly what I was talking about. And what I've learned since then is that there are some incredibly accomplished people who have admitted feeling like frauds throughout their careers. Like they just got lucky. Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor, Sheryl Sandberg, Tom Hanks, even Albert Einstein, whose name is synonymous with genius, thought of himself as an involuntary swindler. Isn't that a great term, involuntary swindler? But think about that. The man who envisioned riding through space on a beam of light considered himself to be nothing more than a lucky hustler because he just happened to discover the secrets to the universe before anyone else. It's called imposter syndrome. There are different types of imposters, but the kind I share with these famous folks is having a distorted perception of what I think I can do, what I can actually do, and what I think everyone else can do. The problem with people like us is the bigger the goal, the greater the achievement, the more ubiquitous the feelings of fraud. Imposter syndrome was discovered back in 1978 by psychologists Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes. They were trying to determine why successful women often minimized their success or dismissed it as luck. Since then, we've identified different imposter profiles, but the one thing they all share is that it's most prevalent among driven, aspirational high achievers, women and men, in all professions and social groups. Practically by definition, if you have imposter feelings, you're successful. It's not a fear of failure or a crisis of confidence. We can set big goals and go after them. It's more a dismissal of merit, a predisposition to minimize accomplishments as something you stumbled into rather than something you earned. Now, we all have an inner critic who provokes self-doubt and fears to some degree, but the imposter's critic is extremely persuasive, loud and rude, a bully. And even though intellectually you can reason that your success is the result of grit and hard work, the critic lives in the emotional brain, where negative thoughts are amplified. We just don't do our best thinking under those conditions. Negative thinking creates psychological discomfort and disrupts rational thinking. Unfortunately, we're wired for negative thinking. It's an ancestral hand-me-down. The brain's primary job is not to think. It's to keep us alive, so it's always scanning for danger. A few million years ago, the ability to dodge danger was a matter of life or death. Our ancestors weren't blissfully basking in the beauty of the great outdoors. It was far more important for them to be on the lookout for saber-toothed tigers and killer crocodiles. Over time, we've evolved, but we've retained that hypersensitivity to threats, both physical and psychological. This is why negative thoughts and emotions imprint on the brain more quickly, linger longer, and have much greater impact than positive ones. Today, it explains why "you go, girl" feels good for a minute, but a negative comment leaves a mark that stings for days. Most people think of the brain in terms of left brain, right brain, but there's also an upstairs brain and a downstairs brain. The brain develops from bottom to top and back to front. The downstairs brain, or the survival brain, is the first to develop, and it's responsible for all of those functions that keep us alive: breathing, heart rate, movement. The emotional brain, or the limbic system, is in the very center. This is where the inner critic lives, right next door to the amygdala. The amygdala is responsible for a host of functions, including processing emotions, most notably fear. The best thing about the amygdala is that it's worth 15 points in Scrabble. The worst thing about it is that it can literally hijack the thinking brain, or the upstairs brain, the last to develop. The neocortex is where all the heavy-duty thinking happens. Unlike the downstairs brain, which is fully developed at birth, the upstairs brain goes through some serious remodeling, from kindergarten to college. In fact, the prefrontal cortex, the part that handles impulse control and decision-making, doesn't fully develop until our mid-20s. Think about that. The brain isn't done cooking at 16 when we learn to drive, or at 18 when we can vote, or even at 21 when we can legally drink. The thinking brain doesn't fully develop until closer to the age of 25. But remember, the brain's primary job is not to think. Following the order of development, our neural priorities are first to survive, second to feel, and third to think. At the first sign of a threat, the amygdala immediately springs into action, momentarily putting the thinking brain on pause. For example, imagine you visit the zoo and you see a lion. Your instinctive emotional response is danger, and the amygdala sounds the alarm. But the thinking brain eventually catches up, assesses the situation, and determines you're safe. It disables the alarm. Logic wins. But we don't default to logic, altering the narrative to fit the experience. We default to emotion, altering our perception of the experience to fit the narrative. Emotions create beliefs. I didn't earn this. I don't deserve this. The stronger the belief, the stronger the need to explain it away. It's a mistake. I'm a fraud. It's irrational. But in a mental tug of war, logic is no match for emotion. We tend to think of imposter syndrome in a professional sense, but it's becoming more pervasive in our personal lives. Our need for connection and belonging is so strong that we're always searching for indicators about how we measure up and where we fit in. For example, the entire ecosystem of social media is built upon single snapshots in time, measured in likes and shares. We see the filtered and photoshopped perfection of everyone else compared with our own wrinkles and warts. And what about ghosting? You know what I'm talking about. Disappearing without a trace isn't new, but there was a time that it was only common among scoundrels and thieves. Well, and Jimmy Hoffa, obviously. But today it happens all the time. Someone you care about just vanishes. Poof. No phone call, no email, not even a text. And it's not confined to dating either. It happens in meaningful friendships and professional relationships. From a neurological perspective, ghosting is a form of emotional cruelty. Acceptance is one of our deepest needs. Rejection, one of our deepest fears. Social rejection lights up the same pathways in the brain as physical pain. Regardless of the ghoster's intent, the brain processes it as if it were a punch in the face. And the lack of closure that comes with ghosting intensifies that pain. A psychological phenomenon called the Zeigarnik effect explains why unfinished business consumes so much mental and emotional bandwidth. It's like continually trying to solve an unsolvable puzzle. One of the most insidious aspects of ghosting is that we don't question the character of the ghoster. We question our own. The Zeigarnik effect is your inner critic filibustering a million reasons why you're not good enough, smart enough, whatever enough. I'm serious. If you could put an ice pack on your soul, this would be the time. Not all relationships last a lifetime, but the way we end them matters. Research shows that both social media and ghosting contribute to the growing cases of imposter syndrome. These flawed measures of self-worth influence the way we see ourselves and how we fit into the world. We focus on the mountains we haven't climbed while dismissing the ones we have. We compare ourselves to the person we aspire to be and diminish the person we've worked so hard to become. That's twisted logic, right? But let's face it, we're full of contradictions. Sell yourself, but be authentic. Be confident, but be vulnerable. If we could see ourselves through the same lens as we see others, we'd see that each of us is a unique tapestry of experiences, from awful to awkward to awesome, learning what it means to be a perfectly imperfect work in progress, never finished. Even Albert Einstein wasn't finished until the very end. After his miracle year at age 26, he could have said, hey, I just wrote 4 papers that literally changed the world. So if anyone needs me, I will be on the beach working on my much needed tan. But he didn't. He continued to learn and grow and make valuable contributions to science and our understanding of the universe. This photograph of his office, taken the day he died, shows a brilliant mind full of problems to solve and curiosity to satisfy. So, my fellow fraudsters, in order to stop feeling like a fraud, we must stop thinking like one. Remember, we're all a little bit awful at first until we invest in ourselves to get better. And we get better by learning from people who are better than us. And sometimes that feels awkward. But if you're the smartest person in the room, then you're in the wrong room. The magic never happens in the comfort zone. So set a goal so big, there's no way you'll reach it until you grow into the person who does. When you crush it, claim it, own your awesome. Because the only person you should compare yourself to is the person you were yesterday. And today's awesome is all because of yesterday's awkward. Look, it's not who you think you are that holds you back. It's who you think you're not. So the next time you think you're not good enough, not smart enough, not whatever enough, remember, you are a perfectly imperfect work in progress, and you're not even close to being done. Thank you.